Well, hi again, everybody. It's Ken Calvert, and welcome to the Ken Calvert Show podcast. Ken Calvert here from the lovely studios of WKEN, where every day is the weekend. If you ever noticed, by the way, unless I'm not doing something right, it's kind of hard to call a podcast. Telephone-wise. So you can't do giveaways. You can't, convince people to dial by to your podcast because at 1 o'clock this afternoon, I'll be giving away Journey tickets at Comerica Park on July 13th. Well, unfortunately, I can't do that because I don't have those tickets. And number two, there's absolutely no way for you to get a hold of me at this point of the podcast. Why did I bring that up? I don't know, because I like to ramble. And you know that from listening to me over the years. One of the reasons why I probably was not renewed when my contract was up, a little over a year ago. The reason why I bring Journey up, though, is because this morning on Twitter, I happened to find a photo of me in the WRIF studios back in 1977. We had just moved into these incredibly gorgeous new studios right at Broadcast House, the Channel 7 complex that is here locally in southeast Lower Michigan, right in the area of 10 Mile and Northwestern Road. It was brand new. It was a ABC-owned and operated facility. And I was interviewing at the time the King Bees. My Mistake, the new song, had just been released. The entire band was in the studio. It's a great photo. I don't know who took it and where I got it, but I put it up on Twitter at Calvert, WCSX. And it just sort of exploded because at the time when working for ABC, we were not allowed to have VU meters, those little meters that they always show on television when they show any shot of a radio station. We didn't have those because we weren't allowed to, given the contract between the engineers and ABC and the disc jockeys in ABC. It's a long story, but we had to take our volume and just push it all the way to the top for everything. And the same thing with the VU meters. We just never knew exactly how hot we were getting because somebody else was controlling that. Does that make sense? To some of you it does, to others it doesn't, and I apologize for that. I guess the sweet spot of that story is the fact that I mentioned Journey, because up on the blackboard back in 1977, it says, "Do not announce any more information about the Journey concert until further notice." And so I tweeted today, well, now we know it's July 13th, 2018. I didn't think anybody would get that, but a lot of people did, and they chimed in, so thank you so much for that. Now, I mentioned Journey going back to 1977, which I hope is a good segue for what I'm about to play for you today. A friend of mine who put me in touch with Jim Messina of Loggins and Messina, Poco in Buffalo, Springfield, who has a new song out that we're going to talk about here in just a couple of seconds. But if I were to say to you right now, think about it, Buffalo, Springfield, Poco, Loggins and Messina, you'd think country, folk, rock and roll, possibly all of the above. Think about songs like For What It's Worth, Mr. Soul, Rock and Roll, Woman, Kind Woman, Crazy Love, Real Love. Then Angry Eyes, Danny's Song, Your Mama Don't Dance, House at Pooh Corner, Watching the River Flow, Bahibala. So many songs that Jimmy Messina had a monster part in. And again, it all started in the early 70s, rolled through the 80s, and continues today. Not Loggins and Messina, but Jim Messina is still out there working it all around the country. I have always been fascinated by anyone doing music for a living and succeeding. It doesn't really matter to great success or limited success. I just love talking to musicians. I always wanted to play the drums well. I didn't, but I always wanted to be in a band. And that probably started with the Beatles when I saw them on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. Anyway, obviously I have no notes in front of me to make me go through this quickly. But at the time, we as broadcasters and the musicians were kind of like, it was a revolution. It was a musical revolution. And we were protesting and we were experimenting, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And we were getting our direction from the music and, of course, our peers. About 5 weeks ago, there was that horrible situation in Parkland, Florida, and 17 beautiful people lost their lives to senseless gun violence. Jim Messina has written a song, Stand Up for Our Children. Stand Up for Our Children. You can hear it at bandcamp.com, bandcamp.com, and then just in the search bar, type in Jim Messina, and for free right there, you can hear Stand Up for the Children, or Our Children, Stand Up for Our Children. So that was what the starting point was for this interview that I gathered with Jim Messina yesterday. They told me that I had a total of 15 minutes, and it turned out to be about 45 minutes to an hour. So lots to gather from this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I don't do a whole lot of talking in the interview. Jimmy Messina does most of it. So that's why I would get the heavy lifting part of my voice in the front end. My wife claims that I love the sound of my own voice. And that's not true. I don't. So here it is. Here's Jim Messina on WKEN, the Ken Calvert Show, the podcast with Jimmy Messina. Jim, how are you?
Good morning. Good, thank you.
Where do I begin with you, man? Where would you like? Where would you like to start? Ken Calvert, along with Jim Messina, and Jim has written a powerful new song. It's now out. It's called "Stand Up for Our Children." And would you like to start there? I think that's an important part of the interview. Obviously, we're dealing with the senseless, horrible situation that occurred about 5 weeks ago in Parkland, Florida. Obviously, the entire country was moved. So talk to me a little bit about why you decided to put pen to paper on this.
Well, it's actually started, that song actually started a number of years ago, but I wasn't getting any response from the people in the business that was really an important thing to be writing about or talking about. So I put it on hold, and it's been there for a number of years, and then I brought it out in California and sang it at an inaugural for local judges. As I've been on the Sheriff's Council here in Santa Barbara for, 13, 14, 15 years. And so I live in the community with my friends and family, not so much about entertainment business, but just about real community. And,
sure, yeah.
And I remember at the time the sheriff was liked the song, but he was upset because I had a line about turn our prisons back into schools. And he took it as, we need prisons, and when you talk about things like that, then you keep me from getting what I need to get. Basically, I'm interpreting what he said. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't the time either. So, but boy, in Florida, when that situation happened, it just it's like a knife in my heart. And I guess it made me go back into the studio, take the song, pull out lyrics that perhaps were more about yesterday and bring it up today. And for me, I've kind of come into my life as I'm not really either a Democrat or a Republican. I'm just from my community. And I'm beginning to think that politics has a tendency to have its own direction as opposed to probably what I naively feel is supposed to be about, us as a people, as a community.
Yeah, I certainly am picking up what you're laying down.
Yeah. And so, I'm not into politics. I never have been. It's just not. It's never been in my nature. Occasionally I'll write a song like "Golden Ribbons" or "Same Old Wine" or something like that hits me. But this particular one really hit me, and it's one of those situations where, as a parent, I just can't sit still and not say something about it. And I think for me, it's a call to the community to stand up and say, look, enough is enough. It's time for us to protect our kids, protect our communities, and not divide between red and blue or east and west, or allow ourselves to be put into a situation as we happened in the past. I mean, we do not need a divided nation. I mean, I think about the Civil War and what happened there, and I think we're moving into a place where, the parties, both of them have got us all in a position where we're supposed to not like one another because we happen to be a liberal or a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, like I said, I serve my community, and I love my neighbors, and I love my friends, and I love some of the people that are on the police department or sheriff's department to keep us safe.
Yeah.
But it's time for me as a parent and my neighbors to stand up for ourselves, stand up for our children, and start saying enough is enough. And that's pretty much what the song is about.
I'm so on board with where you're going with this, Jim Messina, my guest. And so this is a great opportunity for you to tell us now as well, Jim, where we can get it. And I believe that the social media and the streaming download, correct?
To me, this is not about commercial or about my career. It's just about me as a songwriter. And so actually I asked my wife what she thought, and she said, why don't we just at least put it out so people can get a sense of how you feel. And again, I'm not a political person. I don't want to, I would never stand up unless it was for our kids. But we didn't want to release this as a commercial record because it's not about making a profit. But she thought that I should put it out on the social media. So what we did is we put it out for people to hear, and then I think on our download page, we have a Bandcamp page, which is fairly minor, so it is available on Bandcamp, Jim Messina Bandcamp page for people to download and listen to if they would like to have it.
Jim Messina is my guest. I'm Ken Calvert, and it's a podcast. We call it the Ken Calvert Show, and I like to say broadcasting live from the WKEN studios where every day is the weekend. And so with that said, Jim Messina, again, my guest. Can we do a little time traveling for a little bit?
You bet.
All right, where would you like to start? How about, can we start with Poco?
We could start even earlier. Why don't we start back in 1967 when I was a recording engineer working at Sunset Sound.
Let's do it,
in Hollywood.
Okay.
And that was the first time I was a young man. Tootie Camarada was the owner of the studio. He happened to be, at that time, used to do all of Disney's music, which is one of the reasons why he had a studio. And he hired me there as a young man. I think I was 19, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And one of my first clients was Gypsy, who was the manager of the studio. She said, Jimmy, I need you to be in at 10 in the morning. Tomorrow we've got a client coming in just doing a simple demo project. Could you do that? And I said, sure. And I said, who's coming in? She says, well, his name is David Crosby. And I said, so I thought, Bing Crosby has a son. Wow, I didn't know that. And so I showed up the next day, and there was this, guy with a mustache and kind of curly hair, and had a young woman with him. He's getting ready to cut some demos, and so we went into the studio and said, "Was there a place I can plug this in?" And I said, "What is that?" He said, "It's a lava lamp." And I'd never really seen one. I said, "Well, yeah, we can plug it in over here." And he said, "I need you to turn the lights down." I said, "Well, I'm going to have to get everything set first." He said, "Well, when you do that, turn the lights down." So I turned the lights down and started recording, 8-10 songs. And I was kind of intrigued because this particular artist I thought was pretty good. I mean, it's very seldom you get somebody coming in with a guitar and a voice, and it's even interesting. So we finished and got everything done, and putting the tape together and the label on. I said, "Who should I put down as the producer?" And he says, "David Crosby." So I put David Crosby in. Well, who should we put down as the artist here? And he goes, "Well, her name is Joni Mitchell." So we got Joni Mitchell across the front. And that was the first time I'd ever heard Joni. And I'm proud to be able to say it. I mean that in a sense of a professional, that she was spectacular from the moment she stepped into the studio. I mean, just here I was, a skinny little Italian kid from San Bernardino. I didn't even know who David Crosby was, didn't listen to the radio much because I was a recording engineer and I worked day and night. And I was so thrilled with hearing her voice and hearing her sound. Of course, I fell in love with her, but didn't want to go there. At 127 pounds, making $125 a week, I didn't think I was much of a catch.
Right now. Oh. Okay, continue, please.
So, at any rate,
Jim, or sometimes Jimmy Messina. Jim Messina, did you ask David Crosby after how to label it, writer, producer. Did you say, who should I put down as recording engineer? And did he say, put down Jim Messina?
No. I just,
Oh, okay.
I did my job. My job was as an engineer.
Jim, your job is to self-promote, damn it. You were 20 years old.
I wasn't there yet.
Okay.
I'm still not there. I still am uncomfortable doing interviews because,
Well, you could have fooled me, pal. You're doing great, so let's keep rolling.
It was after that that David actually, from what I heard, went to the Buffalo Springfield group, probably Neil, and said, I just worked with a young engineer over at Sunset, and they had recorded there before with Bruce Botnick, who was also really a wonderful, wonderful engineer.
Yep.
And that's when I first met the Buffalo Springfield. At the time, the first person I met was Neil Young, who I thought was the producer because he was the only one that showed up for the session, and I brought in a whole bunch of tapes from Columbia Records, which Ahmet Ertegun had cut with them initially. He was their producer at first.
Yeah.
And then, I thought he was the producer because he was very professional, and we started sorting through tapes, and then eventually I met Stephen. Stephen was a brilliant songwriter and just really a very stylistic acoustic guitar player. I always loved his acoustic guitar playing. And again, was an electric player, had a kind of a style there too. Richie was a singer-songwriter and very full of a lot of life and smiles and energy. I was attracted to him right away as a pal, and he's had the kind of personality you wanted to help him in any way you could. So my career as an engineer started out there. We cut the Buffalo Springfield Again album, and then they went away and started working on some other artists. At any rate, they came back later and booked time again, and this time we started their third album, which had not yet been titled yet. And during the course of that time, Bruce Palmer had got himself busted, and being a Canadian, they decided to send him north. And so they didn't have a bass player, and so there was an audition that was held. So I show up at the theater, and there's about 10 other players there. So they audition everybody, and finally at the end, Neil says, "Is there anybody else who we haven't, yet tried out there in the audience?" Because we were in a fairly large theater, and it was dark, and I raised my hand, and they said, "Who's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's me." He goes, "Oh yeah, Jimmy, can I come up?" So, I plugged in, and they ran through the song. Well, we got about 8 bars, and Stephen looked at me and had this look on his face, and I go, "Whoa,"
Oh, wow.
And so I got the job, and they just couldn't believe that I could play as good as I could. And of course, my instincts were, hell, I've been working with you guys for over a year. If I haven't figured out how to play these parts, it's like, duh. And so anyway, I got the job, and so now I'm working as their bass player and engineer. And then about 10 o'clock at night, I was living in Burbank. I get this call, and this guy introduced himself as Ahmet Ertegun.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm the president of the record company that Buffalo Springfield is on, and we need a producer for them. And he says they're having a hard time finding one, and they pretty much told me that you're about the only one that they trust in the studio. Would you be willing to take the job? So I thought, yeah, sure. And so, hung up the phone, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I like this group, and I like Bluebird. That was the first record I ever heard.
Sure, yeah.
And so that kind of began my career with Springfield. I was their producer, engineer, and bass player. And that's pretty much where it begins before we get to Poco.
Wow. Well, then we move right into Poco. I suspect at that point your part was a little larger. I mean, there was no auditioning at that point. It was you and Rusty Young and Richie.
Well, actually, it's a little different than that. Buffalo Springfield was on their verge of breaking up. I was finishing up the last record. I'd gone to New York trying to keep the band together, hoping that they'd all, get there. Ahmed set up flights for everybody so we could at least be in one place. And that proved to be a little bit of a problem because Neil never showed, and I don't recall Stephen being around either, because when I listen to those songs that we cut there, his performances are not on them. We cut Kind Woman, we cut Carefree Country Day, and we cut one other song which I don't recall. And these were all pretty much for Richie because the other guys weren't there. Got back, started listening to stuff, and one of the things that happened while we were in New York, which looking back, I don't think it could have been any different. But Arif Marden, who was one of the producers working for Atlantic, when the guys didn't show up to record, I went to Ahmed and I said, I need some musicians, and I don't know who to call. This is like a foreign country to me, New York. And he says, well, let me get you Arif. So Arif came in and we talked, and I told him we need a bass player, we need a drummer. We got these 3 songs. He says, oh, I'll take care of you. So next day we show up. Well, the bass player was an upright player, which I'm not used to playing with, and the drummer was really more of a jazz player, as was the keyboard player. So we cut these songs that were supposed to be Buffalo Springfield songs that had a whole different genre to them. So when I get back to L.A., we go into Sunset. I'm thinking, boy, I don't know, what am I going to do with this Kind Woman song? It really needs to be more of a kind of a country feeling song, and here we have these kind of jazz players playing on it. So at the time, Miles Thomas was our road manager in Buffalo Springfield, and he says, I know these 2 guys living, or actually one guy living in Colorado. His name is Rusty Young. He might be a good guy to bring out and do it. He's your age, and might be kind of fun. So we took a gamble on it. We flew him out. We brought him into the studio, and regrettably, the airlines had dropped his steel and broke it. So by the time he's ready to play, he hasn't got an instrument. So, what are we going to do? And I thought, Stephen, when we were on the road, bought a steel guitar, and I think it's set up over here in the closet. Let's pull it out and see. So we pulled it out, and much to Rusty's disappointment, it was not the instrument he'd be wanting to play on. I guess if you're used to playing a Les Paul and somebody pulled out a Sears and Roebuck guitar to play,
yeah.
that would be the comparison, right? So Rusty, got it tuned and set it up, and the pedals were all backwards from what he was used to playing. Anyway, he lays down this solo that to this day, to me, is probably the best solo he's ever done on that song, and I don't know how many times I've played with him on it, but it was just phenomenal. And it was at that moment that Richie and I looked at each other, because we had thought, what are we going to do when Springfield breaks up? And I remember being in the backseat of a taxi cab once, a number of months earlier, discussing, what are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do? Well, I haven't thought about it. And at one point in time, I remember saying to Richie, I said, well, we did folk rock music here with the Springfield. Maybe we could do something more country, like Your Kind Woman or Child's Claim to Fame, country rock, maybe something like that. And we had talked about it. It was in the air, but it wasn't until Rusty put that solo on the Buffalo Springfield record that we both looked at each other and thought, well, maybe we can do this. So it really started in Buffalo Springfield, but it wasn't until April of the following year, when the group finally broke up, that Richie and I started thinking about, well, do you want to work together? And we had these 2 songs that he had, and he was writing new songs, and that's when we thought we'd call up Rusty and see if he wanted to come out. And that's at that same time, we were looking for a drummer, and he said, hey, my good friend George Grantham plays drums. Should I bring him too? So that's kind of how it started with the 4 of us.
Wow.
And then later we brought in Randy Meister, because I didn't want to play bass anymore. I was the bass player in Springfield. I didn't want to play bass anymore. I wanted to get back to playing the guitar.
I'm time traveling. I am in the studio with you guys at this point, and my bell bottoms are embroidered once again. I mean, it's just like I'm wearing.
They're short.
They're very short. I had the opportunity to talk with Stephen Stills a number of times, and he tells a great story about Neil Young and Neil's fascination with all things hearse. he had hearses, and he talks about losing Neil at one point up in Canada and finding him on, I think, whatever it was, Sunset Boulevard one time, and he knew it was him because it was a Pontiac hearse, and he had never seen a Pontiac hearse in his life, and he said, there's only one guy that could possibly have that, and it's Neil Young, and he pulls up next to him at a light, and he looks and rolls down the window, and it's Neil, and he goes, Neil, your mother told me to have you call her, and it was one of the great stories, and that's why I love waxing poetic with you guys, because I'm basically just a little younger, but I certainly went through all of that musically with you, and I remember being in so many pubs and in college and whatnot. A lot of the people were trying to emulate and impersonate Buffalo Springfield, and of course they were doing Poco, and eventually they moved on, as I will now, to Loggins and Messina. And I just want to say, if we can move that in that direction, Jimmy Messina, the first opportunity I had to see Loggins and Messina was at the Masonic Auditorium in Detroit, Michigan, 1973. It was my first year in radio, and the entire radio station went to see Loggins and Messina along with Jim Croce. And I believe that Jim Croce opened the show. You guys were the headliners, and Croce was just starting to take off, and unfortunately, I think we lost him about 2 months later. I think it was September of '73. And I remember being young. I was probably 22 or 23 on the air, and losing my mind because I had finally followed my dream, and I just remember that hitting me so incredibly hard. What? Dead? I just saw him, but at the same time watching you guys, I remember exactly Kenny Loggins coming out, sitting on the side of the stage. I think he was wearing like a football jersey, and then you came out. Then the band started to come out from behind. One of the most powerful shows, maybe because of the fact, but I think not. It was so early in my career, but to this day, it just stands out. It was a hallmark moment in my life, and so I want to thank you for that.
You bet.
I guess many years later, but. So let's talk a little bit about Loggins and Messina. The happiest times and the worst of times. Is that how it's going to end up?
No, not really. I mean, not for me. It was a difficult departure from Poco, really, because I had become very close friends with Richie. He was sort of my mentor. I looked up to him. He was married, and Nancy, and I was a single guy. So I gravitated more to a more traditional kinds of relationships and friendships. Neil and Stephen were really out there in the world and playing music and rubbing elbows, where I felt more comfortable, stable, and Richie was very much that for me. But as time went on and those guys became more successful, it became more and more difficult for Richie as I look back. I mean, I sensed this, and I felt it in those days. But now, at 70 years old, I can look back at us in our 20s, and after having, listened to some interviews from Richie and get a better perspective of perhaps what was happening inside with him, I think he was frustrated, and he was, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but envious maybe of their successes, and he had not had those successes. Mm. And as a result, his personality was becoming difficult for me to be around, and he was beginning to change. And then eventually it started to turn on me a little bit. It came out in situations like for instance, one time we were in Columbia Records, and he was trying to hit a high note on a song. And in those days, it was a union house. The tape machines were the size, they were actually video recorders that had been turned into 16-track machines. And they were in a different room. And as a producer, I was sitting next to an engineer, and the tape machine engineer is in another room. And they had a button on there, a record button, that I'd say kind of looks like, well, your audience would probably recognize the size of a button if you had a stop button and a go button on a major industrial machine like a table saw or a press or something. You have to hit that red button to make it record. And Richie had gone through this thing about 8 times already, and he had missed the note. And So I was keeping the machine on the input side, so I could hear what was going into the machine instead of hearing what was coming back, because you're hearing a delay whenever you listen to the playback heads.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
he finally sang it, and I think it was right, but the guy missed the button, and so he says, "Well, I finally got it," and he was like really frustrated. I go, "Yeah, you did, but I don't think we got it." "Oh, well, let me hear it." I said, I don't think we got it. So he storms in and he says, "Let me hear it." Of course, he didn't get it. And at that moment, he says, "Yeah, I guess I have to do things myself if I want to do it right." And he pushed me out of the way. And I thought at that moment, you know what? I think we've gotten to the point here that if things continue to go any further, I may lose a relationship with somebody who I deeply care about. And it was at that moment I decided it was time for me to exit. And Richie was, as I say, was continuing to be upset and frustrated. So I told him that I would be leaving and that I would, I'd help them in any way that I can to make the transition. And by this time, I had also talked to Clive Davis at CBS and told him I really wanted to produce more, be home with my wife. I'd just gotten married in 1970. And he said, "Well, get the record finished and make sure that you leave on a good standing." And he said, "I'd be happy to discuss it." So I told him that I was leaving. I'd finished the album that we were working on. If they needed any help finding anybody to replace me, I'd be there. They found Paul Cotton, who was a great choice. By that Christmas, I had left Poco. But it was at that time when I was finishing that record, finished the tour with Poco, and around December of 1970, I get a call from Don Ellis, says, "Would you like to meet with Kenny?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "Just have him bring some tapes," because I had a tape recorder there at my house. And so Kenny shows up, and much to my surprise, here's this pretty tall-looking critter with a beard, long hair, yeah, wearing jeans that looked like they could have had a load in them. I was thinking, who is this guy? So he shows up, and it's just this really happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and we started chatting, and I said, "So, you have some tapes for me to listen to?" And he goes, "No, I don't really have any tapes." And, "Oh, okay. Did you bring your guitar?" "No, I don't own a guitar." Oh boy, that was my first impression of an artist that had been sent to me. Right, no guitar, no tapes. So I kind of felt, yeah, I kind of felt uncomfortable. But I thought, you know what? I think what I need to do is play this out. So I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I got a couple of guitars here. There's a tape recorder, Sony tape recorder, set up. Here's a chair. Here's my instrument. Play your tunes." So he went through and he played about, 6, 7 songs. I still have them on tape.
Really?
And one of which was Danny's song. One was House of Blue Corner. A couple of other tunes, maybe 1 or 2 of which we never recorded.
Get out.
I think Bahivela was on that. So we recorded those tunes, and I pressed stop, and we had a taco dinner that night, chatted, and he left. And afterwards I said to my wife, I said, "What do you think?" She goes, "Yeah, I don't know." She says, "He's kind of a folk artist, isn't he?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, that kind of bothers me, because folk's over. Game over, man. Yeah. What are we going to do with this? And but the thing is, it kept hitting home to me, is that his voice had a quality to it that, as he went through the different songs, I realized that he could change the epiglottal of his voice to make it sound different, and yet he had the range there. He wasn't straining. So I decided to spend more time with him, and we got together and we started recording a few things. And the thing I loved about him personally was that he was very positive, and he wasn't afraid to try anything. And he at that time told me he liked rock and roll too, and he liked this. And so I started throwing other songs at him, and I realized that he had the capacity really to do more than just folk music. And what really scared me at that point, in my life in wanting to produce somebody was I did not want to have happened to me what had happened in Poco. And I'll give you an example. Another artist that was thrown at to me at that time had, I'm trying to think of his name right, that just slipped my mind. Well, at any rate, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
Had wanted to work with me, and I asked him, I said, so what is it why is it you chose me to want to work with you? And he says, well, Dan Fogelberg, that's who it was.
Okay.
He says,
heard of him too.
He says, I really want to work with you because I love Poco and I want to make a Poco record, Poco album. And I said, I have to stop you right there. I said, that's not something I want to do. I said, I just spent 3 years of my life creating that band, creating a genre that was too rock for country radio and too country for rock radio.
Rock radio, yep.
I said, the most I ever made in my life in that band was $125 a week. And I said, I can't afford to do that again. I said, I think you're going to need to find somebody else. And so with Kenny, he was open to doing different genre. Mm-hmm. And I had decided in my life at that point that never again was I going to let myself get pigeonholed to where once you've made a record or you've made an album and it's been successful, that you have two choices. You either make that same record again or you just made it to your life that kind of music, and that's what you're known for. And my early instincts were, excuse me, hang on one second.
Yeah.
I just finished singing for a run of 4 dates in a row in my voice.
Yeah, I saw that on your calendar. Yeah, I imagine.
And I said, I don't want to ever have that happen to me again. And so I chose Kenny for those reasons. And but also, he was new. He'd never had a manager, never had an agent, didn't have an attorney, didn't have a business manager. And to produce him meant I was going to have to do more than just help him make his songs if I wanted it to be successful. And at one point there, I started realizing that this is like throwing a babe in the woods to the bears. And at that point in time is when I started getting more involved. I found Merle Brigani and Larry Sims had been in a group called the Sunshine Company, and they had opened for Poco. And at this point in our lives, they had broken up, and they were looking for work. So I was able to get Merle and Larry involved in helping me with this project, because at that point it was just a project. We didn't know whether or not Kenny was going to be able to handle it. Al Garth lived below me in the apartment that my wife and I lived in, so I'd heard him playing sax before, and all through high school I'd had sax players, so I could tell the difference between a good one and a bad one. And he also played a little violin, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
So I brought him into the project, and we started rehearsing in my father-in-law's pool house. I was married to Jenny Sullivan, and her dad was the late Barry Sullivan, an actor out of the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Sure, yeah.
And so he gave us the pool house, and we rehearsed for weeks and weeks until we could get Kenny to a point where he was comfortable and knew the material. At that time, I was giving him songs to help make him more rounded as an artist. He had Pooh, and he had Danny's song, which was kind of folky, which I moved a little more country. I gave him Listen to a Country Song. Also a song called Peace of Mind. And as I started working with him a little bit more, I just started getting the feeling that there was a break in the communication between him and the other guys, because they had all been out on the road and pretty road-wise, whereas Kenny was so young and trying to figure out how to get his bearings in working with these people. He'd never been an employer, and if you're going to lead a band, you have to understand those things. Just the basic economics of people need to get a paycheck, and
right.
somebody need to tell them where they need to be and what they need to do and those kinds of things. And Kenny was very much an artist. He was footloose and fancy free and had that lazy soul that he sings about. And so I just realized that this was going to work. I was going to have to do something that I didn't want to do, which is to step in. And at that point, we'd cut some demos, and I'd send them to Clive, and he loved them. So Clive and Davis and I are having a conversation. He says, I really love this demo. I think it's going to make a great album, but he says, I'm hearing an awful lot of you. I said, yeah. I said, that's because I'm sitting in on some of these sessions, and actually most of them. And he said, I thought you didn't want to go out on the road anymore. And I said, I don't. I really don't.
Yeah.
But I said, if this is going to be successful, he's a new artist. He's a young artist. He's an inexperienced artist. And I said, I think the best way to do this, to be honest with you, is I've got a following with Springfield and Poco. I'd like to go out with him initially as his producer and performer and introduce him to my audience and at least be with him on the first tour so he gets a sense of what he needs to do. He still needs a manager. He still needs an agent. He's got an attorney, but he's going to need a business manager, and these are all things that I think I can help him with. And Clive was a little bit, he understood that, but he was a little bit weary of doing it because from what I recall, he said, the last thing I want to do is to put together a band that's going to come out with an album and hopefully if we are successful, it's going to break up.
Yeah. Yep.
And that was his experience in it. As a businessman, I totally understand that. And trying to run a company that, they were earning $360 million a year, and I'm sure they were listing a lot too. Didn't want to take that risk. So I said to him, I said, look, as far as how I see it, I said, there have been many artists, even in recent times, Leon Russell, with Joe Cocker, Bonnie and Delaney. You have Charlie Bird and Stan Getz, different genre altogether, but these albums did not suffer. In fact, I believe at the time that Stan Getz's first big record was with Charlie Bird. That's what got him started.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, if you look at Eric Clapton, if you look at Jimmy Page, look how they bounced around.
Yeah, and really, it's about getting a foot in the stirrup, and getting on the horse is part of the deal, but staying on it is quite the other thing.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
After a while, I think Clive... he really trusted me, even though I was pretty young. He trusted me and my instincts, and he eventually agreed to do it. And what happened was the record was so damn successful that he was kind enough to come to me later and say, as much as I didn't think this was going to work, he said, I not only has it worked, he said, but, these kind of things only happen once in a lifetime. And he said, I really think you really should stay with this. The two of you should work together as artists and allow this to come to fruition. And no pressure, just an honest observation as a professional, and suggested that I do it. He wanted it to be Messina and Loggins, and I said no. I want it to be Loggins and Messina because I still wanted an opportunity to step off at some point. But anyway, it all worked out. Clive was a great executive to work with.
It's funny. I'm going to stop you for just a second because I ended up going from radio in 1977 to Columbia Records, where I did promotion, and then I moved into marketing, and then eventually I became what they referred to as a RAPM, a regional album promotions marketing manager. And Clive was, and you're talking about a roster that Columbia Records had at that time, which was, everything from Barry Manilow to Paul Simon to Barbra Streisand to Neil Diamond to Billy Joel to Loggins and Messina, not to even mention what was happening on the Epic side of the ball. You're out with Aerosmith one night and you could be with, Barbra Streisand a week later, and so it was they were curious times, believe me. But, the soft spot will always be for Loggins and Messina, which, getting back to this portion of the interview, just the thrill for me to have this much time. We're going on 1 hour with Jim Messina now. I feel like I've written the first chapter of your book. And by the way, you did it, so I'm just along transcribing it here on tape. Loggins and Messina, Jim Messina, sold how many albums worldwide?
I wish I could tell you. I don't really keep track of that. I think somewhere around 16 and 19. It's been 40 years, maybe 20. Who knows?
This is just a financial question that I have, but there were so many levels, if you will, in terms of pay structures for artists and their music. Please tell me that you did well from your times with Loggins and Messina Poco at all. No,
I did very well. I had good management. I had good attorneys that took care of me, and still own all my own publishing. Didn't do drugs, so I didn't have that investment to regret. I've always been pretty level-headed. I've always invested my money in when I had it to invest, and I'm able to support myself quite comfortably in this day and age. Not as much as I could have if had invested in other things, but certainly we're very, very comfortable. And I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old boy that I have raised, and a wonderful wife. And we live in a good place, a safe place, and we have donkeys and ducks and dogs, and we're quite happy.
Going forward, I know that you're still out there as Jim Messina. Do you ever work your way toward this part of the country, the Midwest, Detroit?
I think so. I'd like to be working a little bit more through the year, and then less at certain times. Pretty much like to take off from November to about this time of the year.
Yeah. You don't have to live in this horrible weather, this horrible winter that we've suffered through, and we're still going through.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah, we're actually in the midst of probably moving east. We're going to probably move into the Nashville surrounding area. I need to be closer to the East Coast because I'm working there more, and just the state in itself is just tax-wise has become more and more difficult. Cost of living is difficult. And we do have animals, equine, and we're going to probably, my wife would like to get a horse, and my daughter would too. I started them out with donkeys just to make sure that they were serious.
You're a good man. You're a good man.
And they do protect the farm animals, which I find interesting. They're great for alarming us if somebody's on the property.
Yeah.
You can hear them like a freight train, And the other thing is they're great gasless weed eaters. They eat everything on the property like a goat, so I don't have to hire anybody to weed anymore. And they love my wife. Every morning they're out there waiting for her by the gate, and they're hugging her and licking her. Or she shares her carrot cake with them and lets them sip her coffee. But if I go out there, they look at me and they go, "Who in the hell is this guy?" And then they walk away from me like I.
Yeah. Why don't you go back in there and send your wife out here?
That's it.
Can you do that for me, Jim? All righty. All right. And by the way, bring me a piece of carrot cake next time, and maybe we can talk. Final question for you. Who are you listening to right now musically?
I'm not really listening to anybody right now, and I'll tell you why. I'm so involved in just keeping my set tight and right, and I'm starting to go back and listen to some stuff that I cut, maybe 10, 15 years ago that was put into the vaults. I need to come up with another record, and there's some pretty good songs in there that I've avoided only because I didn't have a label. I'm not going to release songs that they're not going to get any attention.
Right.
So I need to put together an album. So I'm kind of listening to myself right now.
Good.
Selfishly.
Yeah. I go back and listen to my radio tapes all the time.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the same thing, but good for
you. Hey, watch it, pal. Watch it. My niche was talking. Okay, it's guys.
Oh, okay.
Without us guys spinning your records, you wouldn't have those 3 donkeys right now.
Well, I'd have 2.
One more time. Stand Up for Our Children is a song. Beautifully written, beautifully sung, and it's available at jimmessina.bandcamp.com.
All I know is it's Jim Messina Bandcamp. I'm not quite sure what the address is or any of that stuff, but if you go to Bandcamp and put Jim Messina there, okay. I think you'll get somebody other than the Jim Messina who's the politician.
It's so interesting that you would mention that. In Northern California, there's a politician by the name of Ken Calvert, and my name is Ken Calvert, and I get hate mail, and the haters come out because some people don't like Congressman Ken Calvert. So I'm rock jock Ken Calvert. Jim Messina.
Well,
go ahead.
I had a similar situation where people. It wasn't quite that bad, but people would say on Facebook, God, I just love Jim Messina's in Poco and Buffalo, Springfield, and Loggins and Messina. I just can't understand why he got into politics. So those kinds of things happen, and then I have to say, well, I'm not into politics. Let me show you the picture of the real guy.
Yeah, this has just been it's been a real treat and a joy to talk with you. I could go on. And Jim, you've been the greatest. Enjoy the day, enjoy the weather, enjoy your success, and thanks so much for taking the time to give us a call.
My pleasure, and thanks for bringing up some great memories for me.
All right, thank you, Jim. We'll talk soon now. Bye-bye.